working on the remix of you. Tell me about the making of the Everything Is Fine in Arcadia EP. So would it be right to think that Robot Fight Night was the first kind of foray into the concept and or just to tell me, like, where did Everything Is Fine in Arcadia come from, and how long did it take to finish?
Robot Fight Night ended up actually just kind of sliding in at the last second because actually how the EP started was Robot Fight Night was
its own
thing like before the EP, and it's like the third one on it, so it's like it's deep in there. So where did the other tracks come? Well, we got in contact through our manager
with Pixel
Terror, right? And
basically the other tracks on the EP, like we got there, our manager had like a really close in and was like, if you ever wanted to shoot your shot at a collab with Pixel Terror, now's your chance. So how about in the next month, write 5 tracks that you think they might be into? And we were like, okay, so basically the 3 tracks that are on the EP are 3 of our attempts at writing something that we thought Pixel Terror would like. Right. And then they listened to it. They thought it was cool. They gave us the rain check of like, you know, sometime down the road, we'd be interested in working with you. And then we basically took these tracks and edited them and tweaked them a little bit.
There was a lot of tweaking. The first versions were way worse than the finals. Mm-hmm. That was a super tweaked EP, but allowed for a lot of change because like the first versions, all the drums were pretty bad, underproduced. But by the end, we learned so much just through like Pixel Terror feedback, and like Pixel Terror feedback, like that's something that like has been huge for us this last year. Is like Pixel Terror's, their production value is just so high, and getting feedback from those kind of producers is crazy because they'll point things out that you'd never hear. And it really helps train your ear to be getting that kind of feedback, because then you'll start looking for it and be like, all right, does it sound like as good or as produced as like this? And you'll start making comparisons and start upgrading your ears.
So we had gotten their feedback on the tracks. We like went back and revised and we made stuff different, and we tweaked it and made it how we liked it. And even the track, the second track on the EP, Doing It in Style, originally sounded pretty different. Like
it had multiple. Oh yeah, the first version was way different than the last. Like, the drops completely different. It didn't even have the Doing It in Style theme.
Right. And so
which is just a mid-tempo track.
So like as we've talked about throughout this throughout this interview, I guess
it could be. We can make it.
It's gonna be. We'll see. As we've talked about throughout this interview, like we care a lot about like the narrative and the story and the identity of the track at its core. Like it's not like Robot Fight Night was not just the track that sounded like Robot Fight Night. Once we had that identity, we went back and we were like, how do we make this Robot Fight Night with the metal clashes and the chants and all this? Like, how do we build that story around that? So
an Arcadia EP ended up just being like us trying to like do something that was Pixel Terror, and Pixel Terror is like really pretty retro. Like they've got that kind of video gamey sound. So we were kind of like trying to replicate that in our own kind of way, and it ended up having this sound profile to the entire EP.
Yeah, and so because we care so much about that narrative, and these tracks sounded so similar because of where they came from in origin. Before we were really like ready to pitch the EP, we had to come up with like, what is the narrative for this EP? Because if we had this collection of tracks and they didn't interlink with any sort of narrative, then all we have are 4 tracks, like in the same packaging, in the same box. It's not a cohesive EP with a message and a narrative and an overarching theme. It's just, here are 4 tracks. So before we even submitted that, we were like, okay, obviously the first one is like Entering the Game.
Let's just clarify out of all the names. Like, entering the game. What does that mean?
And then the last track is obviously going to be Over. And these were all the working titles as well. So it was easy to stitch these together. So Entering the Game, easy, like entering, that's the entrance. And then Over, the track like obviously
It's the
over.
end.
Right, it's over, like game over basically. So then we had Robot Fight Night, which made sense somehow. We had to figure out
It's
how
the
that
boss
made
fight.
sense. Right, it's the boss fight. We didn't really have that
Yeah, we
figured out
didn't
at the
have that figured
time.
out at the
It
time.
made sense. It made sense. And then we had Doing It in Style, and those were really the finished tracks that we were ready to put together, but we had to figure out the narrative. Doing It in Style actually comes from the Cyberpunk 2077 game, which we were stoked and then incredibly disappointed by, as almost everybody was. But we would watch through like the trailers, and we have like the lore book. I mean, even right there on the screen is a poster. If you tilt the camera more, there's another one. Yeah. But like the postcards, like the world of Cyberpunk 27, the game, the engine, the AI, terrible. The world building and the lore behind it is still really rich. Yeah. Right. And I think that was why people got sort of disappointed, was because they did such a good job
building up the world.
Yeah, building up the world and advertising the world, and then as an experience, it was shoddy to play through.
Right. It didn't let you experience it because of all the glitches and stuff. So you got that instead.
Right. So the idea of Doing It in Style came from something that
right. It was the cyberpunk, the fashion.
Like, yeah, they advertised and showed off that like your fashion, like there's going to be so much customizability, and there's going to be all these different clothing you can wear, and you can change the stats to make your character look good. And so it's like,
yeah, the sample. Do you remember what she said?
Right. There's these 4 sections of people throughout the world, and they are basically separated by their style. And it's like their style of what they wear, their style of how they act, their style of the cars they use, like everything is separated in style. So there's a commercial. There's a like commercial trailer for it where they're talking about the kitsch type of people, and the line that they use to describe these people is that like, it doesn't matter what you're doing as long as you're doing it in style. So that's the motif behind that. And so we were like, okay, that already comes from a video game, so that makes sense. And then we had Robot Fight Night, and we were like, well, that's like the fight, that's the conflict, that like boss fight. So
as long as you're doing it in style.
Right. So the full narrative of the EP now at this point was like, it's
entering into the video game,
entering into the world. We're super into like VR games at the time. We had the VR. We had a bunch of games for the VR. So we're like, okay, it's going to be like virtual reality. Cyberpunk 2077 has this feature called Brain Dance, which is like virtual reality, but you also have all of the feelings and like sensations of the game, or of the brain dance experience. So we translated that into our idea as well, is that it's this like virtual reality game. You put on the headset and it fully takes you over. So you are like entering the game. You are like inside the game completely. And then as you explore the world, you realize that the world cares more about style than like who you are as a person and what you can accomplish. So
that leads to the track 2, basically the motif for the album. Not album, but EP. It's the motif of doing it in style.
Right, is the message of doing it in style. And like in the extended like lore write-up that we have, that because we always like to like actually write word stories for our tracks. We have so many documents of like actual like stories behind the track. In the story, it's like you realize that your character's EXP goes up if your clothing matches more than it goes up by completing quests and evolving your skill tree. So you realize, doing it in style, it doesn't matter what you're doing as long as you're doing it in style. So that gives the character the motivation to enter. They see a flyer for the Robot Fight Night, and they realize, if I get a mech that looks cool and I know how to use it and make it cool, I probably have a shot at winning. And so
the boss fight,
that leads to the boss fight. You go into this underground, cyberpunk fight club where all these people are fighting with mechs.
The Robot Fight Night.
And as a little added motif, like the character walks by and there's these banners of previous winners and all the previous winners of the championships. So there's one of Vault Kid, and there's a Dwelm, and there's Tyraze and all that. So it's like they are in the world as well as they've won previous championships. So the character enters the robot fight night, and then it's ambiguous whether they win or whether they lose. And then they go home to their save point, their respawn point after the boss fight, and like look up into the night, and between the stars and all the satellites in the place are rolling the credits until the sky reads over, and then the game shuts down. Take the helmet off. You've experienced
over is kind
Arcadia.
Of a two split path. Is like either you won and it's over, or you lost and it's over, and that is like kind of stems off of the robot fight night track, whether you won the battle or lost it.
whether you won or not. And so then the sort of multiverse idea is based on whose remix of Robot Fight Night could define how the fight went. If you choose the character Vault Kid, then in place of listening to Robot Fight Night as the third on the EP, you would swap out and listen to Vault Kid's remix, and that's how the fight went. And now Game Over is a reflection of that fight, and totally different story. If I would say Squid Ott's remix in place of Robot Fight Night being super evil, you probably lost.
Yeah,
like Squid Ott's is pretty evil and pretty intense. I would argue
Squid Ott probably beat you.
Yeah, Squid Ott, you probably lost. Yeah. so then Game Over is obviously like, you lost. So that's the idea of that. And so with everything we do, we like to get super creative and talk about the messages and the motifs and the meanings and stuff like that. Like we mentioned, we have pages and pages of stories. I've had to go through and like organize them, because they're just so much. If you go onto our Google Docs, it's like Wintermute story, propaganda story, Game Over story, entering the game story, Arcadia full narrative, and we just have documents of EPs that we've never written and bunch of stuff like that. Because early on, I sort of took a notice to realize the average, if you think about it, like if you draw out, I remember in 8th grade, my English teacher basically took a children's book and read us this children's book, and then was like, okay, if we were to map out the tension of this book, right? You get all the characters, and you start to draw the line of the characters, and it's like, okay, you learn the characters and they're doing things, and you're learning about what they're doing, and now there's conflict. So you hit this first peak, and then, okay, now they start to resolve the conflict. And then towards the end of the book, something worse happens. It's like, how are they going to get out of this? And then there's a final resolve at the end of it. And that is the overarching story, like for any movie, for most movies and books that you will read, is meet the characters, learn what they're doing. There's tension that begins to get resolved. Now there's an even bigger tension that you didn't see coming, and ultimately the hero finds their way out of it.
The hero's journey.
Right, the hero's journey. So if you think about that, right, it's very much, it's like you build up. Here's your tension. Here's your first spike. Then you begin to come down. Then you build up tension again to an even bigger spike. Then you come down again. That's kind of also the framework of electronic music,
right?
Where most tracks have 2 drops. Yeah,
build up starts getting interesting. First payoff is the first drop, and you have like the break. Then you've got like the I don't know, second verse you could have, and then build up more tension into something completely different. Second drop, switch out,
right, and
fade out.
So seeing those two things linked together. We actually I read the book The Neuromancer, which happens to be Dylan's favorite book as well, I learned, which is an incredible read. Cool. It's a great novel. And so we took the idea of the Neuromancer, and I basically took the themes and some of the characters, basically one of the characters, and adapted it into a world within our universe. And wrote a story basically following that curve. And then we took that and translated it into a track. And that is now one of our favorite unreleased tracks that we've ever put together, because we were following this typical story curve. And so we like doing that. So it's sort of the same way with like the EP, and all of the tracks on the EP is they all have their little miniature stories within them. And I think in a dream world, one day we'll be able to do fully animated videos and use the stories we write as storyboards, and be able to, put together music videos that portray and go perfectly along with the music based on these stories we write for the tracks.
Right.
It's so cool to hear like the story of Everything Is Fine in Arcadia from your perspective. You put a lot of thought and effort into building a world and creating a narrative, and it's like the strongest face that like
Right.
I've seen in any release at the dojo, right? And it's really important to, because I coach a lot of ninjas on this. You know, I think a big struggle in the dojo is finding the right face and finding the right narrative. Like, you know, they've dialed in their skill, their sound design skills, their mixing skills, their arrangement skills, all that stuff. But the thing that they're missing is like, well, what's the story? What's the story you're trying to tell? And they really struggle with that. And it's really amazing to hear how much of a deep dive that you do as a team to create the world, the story, the clear narrative that drives every production decision, and then creates this end product that is like deep on so many different levels.